so much for being here today. I am calling this meeting to order. So we are, the Code of Conduct Task Force is now in session. So first is the roll call. Clerk, have you taken the roll call?
Yes, I have.
We're gonna have to mute Mayor Davis.
Yep. No, I'm here.
He's still not muted. Do you have that ability, Chris? Thank you. All right, so from members who are here, noting Mayor Davis' absence, maybe, any declarations of conflict of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Item number 3, presentations, delegations. I believe we have no presentations or delegations. So item 4, items for consideration. Item 4.1, Code of Conduct for Members of Councils of Local Boards, Modernization. Do I have to read this, Chris?
I would just ask for a mover and a seconder to introduce the resolution.
Okay, seeking a mover, I see Councillor Weaver, seconded by Councillor Utley. So now discussion and questions. Councillor Weaver, seeing you moved it, did you have anything you wanted to start with?
No, I'm actually pretty happy with what's before us. I haven't seen any amendments, so I'm hoping there isn't any, because again, we'll have to read those, and with this format, it'll be difficult to move an amendment forward, but I'm pretty happy with what we have here.
So I see no one has raised their hand. Okay, Mayor Davis, you have the floor.
You're muted, Mr. Mayor.
Guys, so I've said these comments before, but I think they're worth repeating. That, you know, we as a council have really struggled with our code of conduct right from the get-go since we first began reviewing it 14 months ago. And this has been kicked around a number of different occasions, different amendments. And for me, when we had the new integrity commissioner come to us in January, and you recall we had a discussion with him about our code of conduct because, you know, I'm used to, as a lawyer, a very detailed code of conduct that aspires to a high standard of ethical behavior. And because of that, you know, there's so many stresses and strains in your practicing law, and, you know, really pitched battles that occur with serious issues. And what the glue that holds the profession together and keeps it professional is our code of conduct. And so I know the value of a proper aspirational code of conduct. And so when the integrity commissioner told us in January, yeah, you've got basically a bare bones code of conduct, which I already knew from looking at it, and that's why we've been struggling with it. So then I thought, okay, what other councils do? And I looked at the County of Brant, and the County of Brant's code of conduct is far more detailed than ours. And that I then looked at a number of other different codes of conduct across the province. And then I spoke to Heidi and Tanya, and Heidi agreed to, as you know, from our resolution of the last meeting, took it on. And, you know, almost all of what's here is not written from scratch. It represents what's been taken from, pulled from the codes of conducts of County of Brant, Thunder Bay, I think it's Bracebridge, Aurelia, London, St. Catharines. They all have different versions of what you're seeing in here. So nothing really new in here. And I'm wondering if Heidi if Heidi's on the line, if Heidi can comment on because I know you reviewed this with the integrity commissioner, just interested in what his comments were and what he thinks of our draft code of conduct.
Good evening, members of the task force. Heidi DeBree, City Solicitor. Through the chair, as Mayor Davis noted, pursuant to the direction of the task force adopted by council, I've spent the last month working with our integrity commissioner to review what you have before you, which I would describe as a modernized code of conduct for members of council. I can't speak specifically for the integrity commissioner, but I can say that based on our last conversation and our final review of this particular code, he'd indicated that this is a code that this city can be very proud of. In fact, if adopted by council, it will become one of the high standards in terms of codes of conduct as Mayor Davis noted, a lot of the language was adopted from other codes of conduct from municipalities across Ontario. When you look at those comparator municipalities, and I say comparator in the loose sense of the word, not because they're similar size to the city of Brantford, but a lot of those codes build on one another and adopt language from one another. But what we did is we didn't just blindly adopt that language. We went through this code and looked at how that could be interpreted, how it would be interpreted by our integrity commissioner, by an integrity commissioner, and how we clarify that for Brantford purposes. So it has been adopted specifically to address the city of Brantford and reflect our various policies and procedures and guidelines and other legislation that may apply to members of council. It was not our intent to reiterate legislative requirements in this code. So where the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act would come into play, we didn't feel it was necessary to build out our code of conduct to simply reiterate what is already in a piece of legislation that applies to you. And so in some senses, this code is quite simple, and in other senses, it's actually quite comprehensive and will really, I hope, clarify your role when it comes to governing this city and the expectations of people you interact with on a daily basis, including one another when it comes to the standard of behavior expected of elected officials. So it's something that I think that if adopted by council does represent a fairly high watermark in terms of codes of conduct for municipalities in Ontario.
Okay. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. Next up, I saw Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of things first. I'd like to thank you for chairing this Code of Conduct Committee. I think you've done an outstanding job, and I think maybe it was the first committee you've chaired. I think so, and you've done a really fine job. Mr. Chair, I'd also, through you, like to thank our staff, specifically Tanya and Heidi and Chris and others who have got us to this particular point. And there's some things I'd like to comment on, if I may. One is 1683, respect for decisions of council. I think that's been badly needed, especially this past year or so. 1610.4, the use of social media, and 1610.7, respecting staff. I think they're very key items that we can do a better job of. And Mr. I'd like to comment on the BIA. Have they, through you to staff, has the BIA received any training through the Integrity Commissioner at this point?
Through the chair, I can likely answer that one for the task force. The BIA was scheduled to actually have the Integrity Commissioner come and visit, and that was in and around March. So things have changed
Bad
since
timing.
then. Yeah, so I certainly would expect that that would be in our future. It just happened to be when the timing was being aligned, the world sort of changed.
That's great, Tanya. I just wasn't sure if they'd received anything or not, so now we know. The other question I have, and I don't know if this can be answered or not, but how do we rate ourselves after a year of adopting this new code of conduct? Do we rate ourselves? Do we ask staff to rate us? I'm not sure if, or even if there's a process to do that. Do we allow involve the public in providing that feedback? Do we do it ourselves? But I think somehow it's going to be incumbent upon all of us, and especially those in the chair, to make sure that we comply with the code of conduct. And that's not always easy. It's busy enough being in the chair, but I think somehow we need to say, hey, well, hold on a minute. I think we're straying away from the code of conduct that we agreed to. So I thought that's something that we need to measure ourselves on every year. What are we doing well? What can we do better? And that way we can learn from any mistakes that that we may have in a constructive, objective way. And that's all I've got to say, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Utley. Next to the floor, Councillor Vanderstelt.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Appreciate it. Unfortunately, I do have comments, but I also do have an amendment, even though that may not be what's wanted at this time, but I do have an amendment. Anyway, members of council may recall me using the term thin edge of the wedge on a regular occurrence in council chambers. When we have an absence of a clear code of conduct for all members of council, it almost seems as though it allows the lowest form of behavior that most people would expect that we wouldn't fall to. And it's unfortunate to see that happens, especially in this level of leadership. So when I see the behavioral loopholes in the absence of a clearly defined code of conduct for how we are to treat one another, we're essentially talking about the nuts and bolts of how to be respectful, how to be kind, how to work together as a group to manage a multi-million-dollar organization on a part-time basis while we're busy with life, work, and other things. It saddens me that we have to get to this point where we have to really put the boots to this and redefine what our code of conduct should be. And well, you know what? I'm in favor of what I'm reading here because this is, in a sense, behavioral modification. If somebody does not understand how to be respectful, how to be encouraging, how to lift one another up, how to take care of one another in positions of leadership, and make sure that we, with a sound mind and good judgment, make the calls that we need to make on a regular basis, considering all of the populations that we deal with, this is behavioral. This is a tool towards behavioral modification. I say it couldn't come soon enough. I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair, to come back to me for it's a very small amendment, and I'm sorry for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Vanderstelt. We do have two speakers, so with your permission, we're going to let them speak before you move your amendment. Next on the docket, Councillor Antosky. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking for some, and first of all, I'm very happy with this document. I think it's great. I'm just looking for clarification on a couple of issues. One under 16.1.8, which is the statement of principle. It talks about performing official duties and arrange their private affairs in a manner that promotes public. So I'm just looking for some clarification on that. You know, for an example might be using your personal social media, for instance. I'm wondering what that is specifically speaking to.
So through the chair, Heidi DeVries, City Solicitor. The idea behind that statement of principles is that as elected officials, you are expected to not only act in your capacity as councillors for the corporation of the City of Brantford in keeping with this code of conduct, but also in your private affairs. So if you are at, for instance, Food Basics, sorry, maybe I shouldn't promote a particular grocery store chain, but if you're at the grocery store and you're in line and you are making derogatory comments towards an individual in line, you could be held accountable according to this code of conduct as well. It's not simply when you are sitting as Councillor Cheryl Antosky, Councillor for the Corporation of the City of Brantford, but in all of your behaviors, both private and public, you would be held to the standards set out in this code.
Perfect, that's what I was hoping to hear. And the other question I have, and I didn't see it, I think that when we were struggling with all of this, we had the word gaslighting, and I don't see it now. I see doxing and others. But I'm wondering if we need to include either gaslighting or inciting, or, you know, so it's sometimes there's issues that aren't necessarily towards an individual, either a public or a councillor, but it's about basically stirring the pot. We could use the term stirring the pot, but I'm wondering if that was consciously removed for a reason, or if we should be putting that back in.
So through the chair, it wasn't necessarily consciously removed. It wasn't consciously removed for a reason. I didn't go through and specifically remove the term gaslighting. In fact, my attempts were to adopt as much of the work that this particular task force had already done, especially around the issue of social media usage. You'll see those specific terms like doxing and flaming and shaming used. If you would like to also use the term gaslighting, we can. I'm not as familiar with gaslighting except for the new Dixie Chick song. But I guess it's a bit of like a psychological method by which you undermine a person's confidence in themselves and their ability. I'm not sure if you'd be looking to use that to prohibit gaslighting just simply on social media. I think some of that would be captured in your social media policy already, that you are prohibiting persons from making statements on social media or promoting other statements about the individuals on social media and promoting posts relating to that type of behavior on social media. I think when it comes to governing behavior, you could use any number of adjectives to describe the types of behaviors you're trying to capture. If there's something specific about gaslighting that members of the task force would like to see in the code, I can certainly propose that, but I would just need some direction in terms of whether or not that's simply on social media or just generally to avoid gaslighting.
Thank you, Heidi. And having you speak to it, I'm thinking that maybe gaslighting is even too narrow for what I'm thinking about. I'm talking about situations that aren't actually necessarily directed at individuals. So maybe inciting or and to me, that's not just social media. I'll wait to see what others have to say on that. I can't see anything that speaks to situations. It's more toward how we treat other people, which is great. I want all of that, but I'm feeling like we might be missing something there unless somebody else sees what I'm saying encompassed somewhere else other than good behavior. But I'll see if anyone else has anything to say on that.
Thank you, Councillor Antosky. Are you finished?
I am for now, thanks.
Nope, thank you very much. Yep, Councillor Weaver, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So looking through this, 16.1.9 talks about the training we'll receive, and that will be conducted by the Clerk's department. So I feel it's very important for us to get training on this as soon as possible, not only for the individual members for our conduct while we're having a meeting, but also for chairing. And I would like that training to actually explain how to handle someone that is being difficult, that's not following the rules, and what our procedural bylaws will do and what we're able to do to control somebody that's maybe not behaving in the most appropriate ways. So do we have any thoughts about when that training would occur? Sorry.
Through the chair, it's Tanya Daniels, City Clerk. Not immediately when I would think that this would go to council potentially in the August cycle as part of the task force process, and then we would look to where could we arrange for that after this would be fully adopted. So I would say potentially earmarking somewhere in the fall would be my estimated guess at this point.
So if this gets approved tonight, and then it'll come to council for approval, is it in place at that point, or as of today, or after the training's in place?
It would be in place once the bylaw is adopted to adopt this reference.
So that would be my concern. I certainly don't want to be in a position where someone isn't aware of any new changes and they maybe do something without reviewing this because they haven't had the training. Because I don't want to put anybody in a embarrassing situation. So I think it's really important that we get the training done as soon after this gets approved at City Council as possible. And my next question would be around committee. So I know there is talk, I can't remember what number it is now, but who this really, like, it applies to council, but we already have sort of a code of conduct for our committees, and it kind of follows a generic city one. Are we going to be updating that so there's some consistencies among what we have in front of us and what all of our committees have to, how they have to behave as well?
So through the chair, Heidi DeBreeze, it's my understanding that the Human Resources Department is undertaking a review of the various city policies that would apply to our volunteers and committees and task forces. And that is our intent, to update those as well and modernize the language in those documents to reflect a lot of what we've done here. That includes the Employee Code of Conduct, which I think is also up for review as well.
Okay, thank you for that. That's all the questions I have. Just a comment. I feel like some of the behaviors we've been witnessing at council is degrading very fast. So I'm happy this is going to be brought out. I think this is very important to get out to all members of council, though, just again, so everyone has the opportunity to review it. And I'm hoping this will help change some of the behaviors that we've been seeing recently.
Thank you, Councillor Weaver. So I don't see any other first-time speakers. So I would like to take an opportunity to speak quickly.
Mayor Davis?
He spoke. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, Mayor Davis hasn't spoke yet.
Well,
Mayor Davis.
Yeah, I'm quite happy with you to go before me, because I normally do that when I chair, where I wait for first-time speakers, then I normally try to speak before second-time speakers. So I'm happy to defer to you before I speak second time.
Thank you. First and foremost, I wanted to say thank you to this committee for allowing me to chair. I personally, I've worked in the public eye for a very long time, and I'm used to having to act a certain way, and I think it's an ethical way. I think that in our position as elected officials, we have to be held to a higher standard. That's my personal opinion. We are leaders in this community. We are advocates for this community, and if people see us doing or saying or behaving in a certain manner, they can misunderstand that as a way that's responsible to behave. And you know, in council chambers and out in the public, we are supposed to be sometimes controversial. We are, you know, opinionated. We are the voice of people, and what people's opinions and what they want us to do and say in council chambers can be controversial. But we should always maintain a certain level of camaraderie. We should always maintain a certain level of professionalism, and we should always respect one another for all the reasons that that's the way you should just treat other human beings. And I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to this committee for all of the hard work, for everybody bringing their own little piece of the puzzle together on this. And then just a huge shout out to the hard work that Mayor Davis has put in behind the scenes to get this done, working together in tandem with Heidi and Tanya, and then to, of course, to the people who, you know, put together the work that they did. I'm very proud to be the chair of this committee and to be here today. And I just want to say thank you. I read this twice this morning, word for word, every page, and there's nothing written here that to me is not just common sense, but that's personally me. And I don't speak for anybody else, but it's pretty straightforward. Be a good person. And I think that's what you should expect from every elected leader, every politician. So I'm so happy to support this. Mayor Davis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So the other group to thank are all the other councils that have, you know, done a very thorough review of their codes of conduct. And that's why in many ways, we're not really reinventing the wheel. We're just following and building on what other councils have done. And so they've done a lot, they've done all the legwork, you know, even including the County of Brant. I mean, their code of conduct is much more comprehensive than ours. So, but I do want to ask one question. This comes out of the Lawyer's Code of Conduct, and the Lawyer's Code of Conduct has the rules, such as we see here, but there'll be then commentary. And the commentary doesn't form part of the official code of conduct, but it gives members of the legal profession guidance. Like the commentary will have an example of, you know, in a real estate transaction, if this happens, this is, you know, how you interpret and apply this particular rule. And so they're methods to help members of the Law Society understand each rule in the code of conduct. I'm wondering, Heidi, have you thought about that? Maybe not immediately, but over the course of time, doing that sort of commentary in our code of conduct, which would certainly help certain, let's call it future councils. Don't forget, we're doing this for future councils. And I also think we're doing it to encourage people to run for council, knowing that there is a high level of behavior expected. So commentary, Heidi, do you know what I'm talking about? And is that something we might consider to further refine and improve our code of conduct?
Through the chair, I absolutely know what, if the chair will allow me, I absolutely know what you're talking about, given that we're required to refresh ourselves on the rules of professional conduct regularly. It would have been my goal to provide you with an annotated code, so a code that actually has hyperlinks to various decisions arising from either other integrity commissioners or from the courts with respect to the standard of behavior expected of members, including defined terms, as well as some guidelines for social media. One of the best examples, I think, is the City of Toronto's guidelines from their integrity commissioner as they relate to social media, as well as their annotations in their code and sort of commentary in their code. The City of Thunder Bay also has commentary in their code. So what I did is built into this code of conduct is actually 16.11.4, which actually provides that I can create supplemental information together with or independently of the integrity commissioner for the benefit of members. So that means both members of council and of the local board. And that includes creating an annotated version of the code of conduct, creating a version of the code of conduct that includes commentary with some of these examples. And I think that's what perhaps Councillor Antosky was getting at, or Councillor Utley. I don't think that it's appropriate to have a code that says, in this situation, you shall do this, right? That's very, very restrictive. And I think that could be used against members in the event that they, any situation requires that you're analyzing on the go how you might approach that situation. And your code should really provide you with the fundamental basics of how you would respond with integrity, dignity, respect, obeying the human rights code and all of those things. But I do think it is helpful to have that sort of commentary. So absolutely, through the chair to your question, that is something that we've contemplated. Also, there's C, which is creating such other material as deemed appropriate by the integrity commissioner. So to answer Councillor Utley's earlier question, if after 1 year our integrity commissioner has noticed that there are quite a few complaints or inquiries or requests for clarification with respect to any specific area of the code or of the municipal conflict of interest legislation, then the integrity commissioner may actually provide additional training material. Again, that material wouldn't be a code that you would have to abide by, but it would be in furtherance of your education as it relates to adherence to the code and various legislative requirements on members of council. So absolutely, we did think about that. I would love to create that document within the next year to have that in the hands of members of council so that as you find yourselves dealing with different situations relating to your public office, that you can reflect back on that document and continue your education as it relates to this code.
Yeah, so Chair, thank you, Heidi, because I know as a lawyer that the commentary section is invaluable. And for lawyers, the Code of Conduct is a bit of a Bible. It's that document, that book you have right next to your office or your desk, because you run into situations all the time as lawyers where you think, okay, how do I deal with this? And you flip to the Code of Conduct, and many times the commentary, it's already there. Some other lawyers dealt with this, some other past decision of the committee that does these kinds of things with lawyers. And so it's very invaluable. I think it would be something we can be proud of at the end of this council, that we've given this to future councils. And it'll certainly, I think, be of great benefit to future members of council. And, in many ways, what I'm doing, I think, is about that. It's about legacy. And I really love that our council can give this legacy to help other councils. That's it. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, next up, I believe it's Councillor Utley. That's the second speaking opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one other comment, and that is council is made up of 11 different personalities, all with different likes and dislikes and priorities and so on and so forth. And I hope out of this, we can express our comments and our opinions at council, and whether other councillors don't like what I say or not is neither here nor there. We're each entitled to bring to the table what we believe is the right or wrong thing. And we have to be tolerant and respectful in understanding that, and not challenge. It's okay to challenge things from time to time, but not challenge the council or the mayor that is bringing that message forward. So I think that's an important item to make, and I think it'll lead to better tolerance and understanding of our own opinions. One of the, my first time on a term, I never forget that. Well, I had my own ideas in my head, and after listening to other councillors around the table, about wow, I'm not sure I was thinking the right way. So it's a wonderful learning experience, and I think I've become a better listener over the years, and so I hope that we're all better listeners as we move forward and more tolerant and respectful, and I think that'll lead to better decisions and certainly better harmony within our council. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks again for your work as chair.
So forgive me, I have lost track on who's next. It's either Councillor Vanderstelt or Councillor Weaver. I'm going to rule. I think he's pointing to Councillor Weaver. I'm going to rule Councillor Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ward Mate. So I'm hoping what the next step of this is going to be once it's approved is we do have joint committees with the county, and I can think of a couple occasions where the passion has gotten the best of people, and in that joint committee session, I'm wondering what code of conduct do we use? Do we use the county's code of conduct on their members and then our code of conduct on our members when it's a joint committee and we're all in the same room trying to accomplish the same thing? Or is there merit to maybe trying to marry up the two to see where we can find some commonality so we're all on the exact same page? Because my fear would be something that's maybe in theirs or not in ours can maybe get misconstrued, and then someone thinks someone did something wrong because it's in theirs and not ours, and it can get kind of confusing. So I'm wondering if there's been any thought about how we would deal with those joint committees where we have county and city members sitting.
So through the chair, it's a really interesting question. No, members of Brantford City Council are governed by Brantford City Council's code of conduct at all times that they're acting in their capacity as members of council, and as you've heard otherwise, regardless of whether you're at a joint committee. If you're at a joint committee, the rules of procedure for that particular committee would apply in that meeting. And so it's important too to understand the difference between the application of a code of conduct and procedural rules that may apply. So when you're sitting, for instance, as a member of council, and during a meeting, another member makes a statement that offends you or otherwise offends the procedural rules, that behavior is to be restrained by the chair in that meeting. You're not going to pause the meeting and call the integrity commissioner. That behavior, if it crosses the line of the code of conduct, could give rise to a formal complaint under the code of conduct through the process set out in Article 12 of this code of conduct. But at the end of the day, when you're in the meeting, it's the rules of procedure for that particular meeting. So when you're at a joint meeting with the city and the county, the rules of procedure that apply to that particular meeting will apply in that moment. And so that would apply equally to all members of the committee, regardless of whether or not you're from the county of Brant or the city of Brantford. But if a county of Brant member offends, for instance, the human rights code in that meeting, which is an offense under their particular code of conduct, a complaint could be filed under their code of conduct to their integrity commissioner about that behavior. Whereas if you, for instance, at the same time you were on social media and you shame somebody or dox somebody, that could actually become a complaint under our code of conduct. And so the codes of conduct that you have are passed by your individual councils and apply to members of your individual councils and your local boards. But the procedural rules for joint meetings would apply equally to all members. That is clear as mud?
Just about. So when we have those joint committees, how do we determine who the holder of the code is? Is it our meeting? So therefore, when the county's at City Hall at a social service committee meeting and they contravene our code of conduct, there's nothing we can do about that. That is what it is. They're just strictly following theirs. And that's the way I perceive it happening right now. And I'm wondering if there's any merit in trying to marry the two up. So when we're having these joint committees, that's just one less thing that can kind of put a wedge between the two communities.
So through the chair, I don't even know if you can legally marry them up. I think that you can share an integrity commissioner under the Municipal Act. I believe you can jointly retain somebody. I'd have to double check those rules, but under the Municipal Act, it basically says a municipal council must pass a code of conduct for its members. So members of council and its local board. It doesn't say for the members of another municipal council. So unless the County of Brant was willing to pass a bylaw that specifically governed members differently when they're at joint committee meetings than they would regularly, you would have to do something like that. So we would have to basically create maybe another article under this code and say, notwithstanding anything else in this code of conduct, essentially, these new rules will apply to members when they are sitting on joint committees. And then the County of Brant would have to do the same thing so that you have this marriage of codes. But again, as I was saying, when County of Brant members are at joint meetings and when City of Brantford members are at joint meetings, you are each governed by the codes and policies of your respective municipalities, but you are jointly governed by the procedural rules of that particular committee. And so I think it would probably be better to look to more robust procedural rules if you're finding that there's behavior that is particularly egregious or offensive at those meetings, because that's the actual issue. You don't, as a council, want to necessarily get in the business of governing the behavior of County of Brant councillors. It's up to the county to say, this is a standard we will hold you to, just like it's up to the city to say, this is a standard we will hold you to as representatives of our municipality. And what you're doing right now is saying, we want to adhere to a high standard because that's the standard that we expect of one another. It's a standard we expect of ourselves, and it's a standard that our constituents expect of us. And the County of Brant may have a different standard on that. But when it comes to your joint meetings, perhaps the best thing to do would be to look at the procedural rules that apply to make sure that you can restrain behaviors that are particularly offensive in that moment.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much. That's very clear now. I certainly want to just stress that I'm not suggesting that there's breaches all the time. And there's been a couple times where I think some passion has gotten the best of people. I'm included in that. I'm just as guilty. So I know I've had some outbursts, which I've apologized for afterwards. But I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on whether or not it was warranted to marry them up. But I can understand we should probably be going after that a different way through procedural bylaw. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Weaver. Councillor Vanderselt.
I see you've also taken it upon yourself to change your background. Good for you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to Tanya. I don't know what point we're at in the speaker's order or how many more people would like to speak, but if I could ask Tanya a question, that would be great. There she is. Tanya, I think you said earlier that this could come back to August council, but don't we have a council yet in June?
Through the chair, yes, you do have a council June 23rd, but there is no cow ahead of that. So the normal process would be that the task force reports would first go to a committee of the whole meeting and then transition to council. So that wouldn't be until August cycle.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But we're also not seeing normal behavior from people. We're not seeing normal leadership behavior. And you know what? Based on what happened last night, I have no problem pushing this a little bit further. Is there a mechanism by which this can come to the 21st or the 23rd?
Through the chair. So the task force, I suppose, could pick to request that this actually be transitioned through the urgent process by way of moving an amendment that would allow the mayor to consider that as part of that process, be able to get it onto the agenda for the June 23rd.
Okay. So under the circumstances, okay. So that would be the body of my amendment that I spoke to earlier, that we get this done and we finish it and get it on the table and pass it and make a bylaw sooner rather than later. This has gone on too long.
Certainly through the chair. Chris is actually I'm attending this meeting, so Chris is chairing this meeting or clerking this meeting. So I'll give him a minute and he might be able to display some wording that you'd be able to consider as an amendment. If you give him leave of about a minute.
Oh, sure, yeah, and sorry, Mr. Chair, if I've usurped your role, but that's what I'm asking for.
All right, so thank you, Councillor Vanderstelt. Chris, there is an amendment on the floor now then?
Through the chair, I believe I've displayed Councillor Vanderstelt's intention for the amendment. We do have a mover, but we don't have a seconder, and I see Councillor Weaver has his hand up.
Councillor Weaver, you're seconding it. I see approval. Can we get discussion on the amendment? Councillor Antosky.
My apologies. I was putting my hand up, not for the amendment, but for the body. I'm in favor of the amendment.
Of course, I see no other speakers. No discussion on the. Seeing no discussion on the amendment, I'd like to call to vote, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Utley, please, speaking to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also very keen to have this adopted as quickly as possible, but by the same token, it's a very, very important document and one that I think is worthy of more discussion with other councillors that haven't been as involved as we have over the past few months. So I am, as much as I would like to support the amendment, I'm arguing with myself over making sure that every one of us has at least one opportunity to speak at depth to the code of conduct. So I'm sorry, Councillor Vanderstelt, but I think it's too important to rush it through. Thank you.
Any other speakers I might have missed? Councillor Martin?
Yeah, Councillor Utley brings a good point, but I think that if we pass this amendment, if we do run into a lot of concern at the council meeting, somebody could move to defer it at that time. So I think we should pass this amendment in the hopes that everybody will have a good chance to read it before it comes to council, and because it'll be included in their package. But if there's no real concern with what's presented, because it seems like everybody on the committee is quite happy with it, including myself. So I think we rush this through and see what kind of response we get from the rest of the council. But if there is a problem, we can always defer it to the next committee of the whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Next on the docket, Councillor Weaver.
Thank you. Speaking to the amendment then. So if we were to, because I do like the idea of having multiple chances to discuss this, because again, I do agree with Councillor Utley that this is very important, and there are members of our council that aren't part of this committee, and I'm very interested in hearing what their input is as well. So what if we were to waive the rules to allow us to have first-time discussion on this item on the 23rd, and then in July, on the 14th, there's a city council meeting. We finish it off there and we approve the bylaw there. Would that be something that would be possible? And I guess the clerks would probably be the best to respond.
Through the chair, so if this item were to be put on the council agenda on June 23rd, members of council will have the 2 speaking opportunities, similar to the cow structure, just because they haven't seen the report before. And so at that point in time, if you do decide that you want to postpone it to the next meeting, let's say in July, then a deferral motion would probably be cleaner way of doing that.
Okay. Yeah, and that's fine. So what I would like to suggest is we have sort of that laid out. So we have that deferral document, like we have it written. somebody has a copy of it at the meeting on the 23rd, in the event that, you know, there is obviously some more discussion that needs to happen. If not, everyone's agreeing, we just move it forward. Because again, that is my concern. I want to make sure everyone has that opportunity. So would that be something that would be appropriate to have a deferral sheet ready in the event that we need it? And everyone's aware that if we do need it, it's there, but we don't necessarily need to use it if everyone's in agreement.
Through the chair, that's certainly something that we could do.
Because part of having these discussions at council, we're live, there's people watching, we will get input from the public, and you know, they should be able to input on this as well. So I would be concerned about first time they're hearing about it, it gets approved and bam, that's it. At least if there's 2 meetings, then we have that little gap where we can get some public feedback as well.
Thank you, Councillor Weaver. First time speakers, Mayor Davis.
It's interesting the comment Councillor Utley made, you know, listening. And I'm hearing what Councillor Weaver has said, and I think there's merit to it. Wondering if perhaps Chris, you could answer this. So can you have that discussion next, well, the June 23rd, and then you don't bylaw till the July 14th meeting, which would in essence allow for another round of discussion? And the other thing I'd say is, you know, we're in this weird hybrid, right? We were in March and April, it was no cow, and council is cow and council, and now we're this month we're into the weird hybrid model. And but I think what Councillor Weaver is saying is that this is not just for us. Of course, it's also the public. It has impact on the public, and yeah, it may be useful to hear what the public has to say. I think on this would be important. So, but can we? Is that a way to deal with it? Instead of a deferral, you just don't bylaw it, and then it comes to July 14th, and when there's a bylaw, you can have discussions on bylaws and amendments. And
That could be something that could be considered. Clause C does direct the clerk to place the bylaw for approval. So perhaps an amendment to Clause C providing direction that the bylaw be placed on for a future meeting.
we could do that at the June 23rd meeting then.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Or a deferral. Yeah, okay.
Members of committee, my sincere apologies. I have to go. I've spoken to Mayor Davis and he's agreed to take over the chair. So Mayor Davis, are you comfortable taking over the chair?
Yeah, I'm comfortable.
Thank you very much. Councillor Utley is next for a second speaking opportunity, unless there are any other first-time speakers. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll see you
Chair.
at council. Take care.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Wells. So, Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given Councillor Weaver's suggestion to have 2 speaking opportunities, I can support the amendment if it's okay with the mover of the amendment and he's agreeable to bring it forward. Would it be next week or the week after, plus July? I'm more than happy with that. It gives us the 2 opportunities that I would prefer.
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about here in council, that I think we'll achieve it. I guess you can look at it this way. So if on June 23rd everybody's okay with it, it just passes it, or if at that time we clearly would have the opportunity to defer it or defer the bylawing of it to the 14th. So. Any other comments?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Anybody else wish to speak to the amendment? Councillor Vanderstel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I hate to bother you on this, Chris, but then how does the amendment read now then? Just that we get the opportunity to speak to it at the 23rd and then it comes back in July? Is that the friendly amendment to the amendment?
Through the chair. So right now we have the amendment asking that this report be provided at the June 23rd council meeting. Typically when council receives reports that haven't been considered at a CAL meeting, we will we'll put that in the chair's roadmap, and members of council will have 2 speaking opportunities. If at that point in time, members of council do not think that they're at a point where they want to have the approval, at that night, council can simply defer it to the next meeting cycle. Now, whether that's at a CAL meeting or at a council meeting, that's up to council. But right now, the amendment is to have the mayor deem it urgent. It will be on the June 23rd council meeting, and you'll have 2 speaking opportunities. At that point in time, council can make the decision whether or not they want to approve or defer.
Okay, but according to Councillor Utley and Councillor Weaver, should we not make mention in the amendment itself that should there be a request or a need or a desire for more public input prior to it being bylawed, that we allow the the necessary amount of time or the forum in which that could happen? Is that not something we should include in the amendment, just to make sure we cover those bases as well?
Clerk staff will already have a resolution for deferral ready for the meeting. So a member of council will have that as an option already, because we've been provided direction to do so. So we're going to provide that wording to somebody from council.
Okay, it's not to split hairs, but you got direction from this committee, but it's not part of the amendment. So is that a necessary add or not?
As you know, I'll take that as informal direction, and we will have that for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
All right, anybody else? I gotta get the participant chart up. I see Councillor Antosky. Yes, Councillor Antosky to the amendment.
Thank you. Yes, I think this is a good compromise. I am quite certain that there will be some pushback in terms of passing it that night. So having the deferral ready to go is a good idea. And just a question for clerks. I think I know the answer, but when this is in our e-scribe, this is in our e-scribe for all members of council, right? It's not just us. So I mean, the other members that aren't on this task force can still access what we're looking at right now.
Through the chair, that's correct. All members of council received a copy of this agenda. They were copied on the email, and this agenda is available on eScribe for all members of council.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I thought. Just needed confirmation. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Anybody else want to speak to the Councillor Vanderstel? Did you put your hand up again? Where'd you go? Did you want to speak again, or did? Well, then unmute yourself.
Well, I didn't get permission, so I didn't think I could.
Like, sorry, I'm not sure if you're doing go on a second or third time. I'll say this is the second time.
I sincerely apologize for being so forward. Chris, could we also just have a record of attendance for all 4 meetings with regard to the code of conduct as well, please?
Sure.
Okay. Any other discussion on the amendment? Seeing no raised hands in the box. Chris, if you would call the vote, please.
All those in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Anyone opposed? Motion carries.
All right. Any discussion regarding the motion as amended? Not seeing any. All right.
Councillor Antosky?
So did you? Sure, I didn't know whether your hand up, whether that's a raised hand from before or whether it's a new raised hand.
It's a new raised hand. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
I guess I'm going to look for some advice from Heidi, if possible. I'm trying to find the best place to address what I'm talking about in terms of, you know, addressing inciting or and it's not just social media. I'm just thinking about, whether it be putting up virtual backgrounds or bringing up conversation from past meetings or, and sometimes on social media, it's stirring the pot. I'm looking for the proper place to speak to that in terms of behavior. It's about situations, not necessarily people.
So through the chair, I would recommend that be placed under 16.10.1. So that's conduct generally. If you look to that particular provision, basically provides that at all times, including in the course of their official duties, members shall, and then it creates this big long list, not big long, it's A to G, about the general standard of behavior of members of council. So things like you're impartially exercising your office, you're exercising care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would exercise. So you're not showing up at meetings, intoxicated, or you haven't failed to do your due diligence with respect to the decisions that you make. You're not impugning or maligning a debate or decision, or otherwise eroding the authority of council or the local board. I think C might touch upon some of what you're speaking about. So a member shall arrange his or her public affairs with integrity and accountability and in a manner that promotes public confidence and respect and is open and honest. There's also refraining from making disparaging comments about other members or speculating on or making unfounded accusations about the motives of other members. So things like, I think my fellow member voted because he or she was on the take, not permitted under this code of conduct. Even speculating, I wonder if they're on the take, not permitted under this particular code of conduct. And then there's also G, which is abiding by all applicable legislation, policies, and procedures. That includes the procedural rules available at the meeting, further to Councillor Weaver's point, as well as our respectful workplace policy. And through the chair, Councillor, the respectful workplace policy actually provides a more robust statement about the standard of conduct expected of members. Again, any training that's provided on this particular code, I think really should include training again on the respectful workplace policy. There was some training provided a little while ago by HR, clerks, and legal about those standards, but that policy does apply when you're in the workplace with respect to conduct as it relates to employees and other members and members of the public who may be in the workplace. And so that is much more robust. That's no discrimination, no derogatory comments, all of that type of behavior. And I would actually venture to say that would include things like gaslighting. So psychological harassment falling within the scope of workplace harassment. I think that if you could make a case, the problem with gaslighting is it's very difficult to identify. That's the point of why it's so insidious. Gaslighting is that sort of repeated undermining and eroding of a person's confidence to the point where they have this psychological effect of not knowing what is true anymore or right, or losing all confidence in themselves. And it's that chipping away at a personality. And it's a really difficult thing for a person to demonstrate evidence of, because it's typically over the course of an extended period of time.
Right, and that's my concern about the situations, that sometimes the comment made itself on its own seems fine, but there's those of us that know why it's being said. So I thank you, Heidi, for that. I'm comfortable that it's covered in various different places, and I just want to make sure that if things like that are happening, that there is something to kind of hold on to in the code for if somebody wants to complain about it.
If I may, through the chair, I think the definition of workplace harassment may actually be helpful in that regard. So it's not simply one particular incident, but it can be also a course of behavior over a period of time that leads, the culmination of which leads to a finding of harassment. So it's that, little snip at the end of a meeting, not inviting someone out for a drink after just you're the one person not invited, or on top of the little snippy email message or the comment that is suddenly retracted. When you take all of that as a whole and you put that in front of an independent integrity commissioner, you may actually find workplace harassment, which is now a violation of our respectful workplace policies, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and this particular code of conduct. So I think that if that's what you're looking to capture, there are actually a number of different policies and pieces of legislation that would interact together to find that there has been a breach of the code of conduct and the standard that you have set as council.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Heidi. I'm comfortable with that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Antonsky. Councillor Weaver.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just something Heidi just said just reminded me of so again, being a Ministry of Labor inspector, I'm certainly not going to get into too much detail, but particularly around election time, this past election was particularly dirty in some municipalities where people found out that they couldn't actually put forward a code of conduct complaint towards somebody, so they actually put in a harassment complaint through the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and the Ministry of Labor inspector had to go and try to deal with those issues. So that seems to be a gap in the system, because obviously the legislation for code of conduct is written in such a way that that type of behavior can't happen to try to affect somebody's political desires. But then someone's using that Occupational Health and Safety Act, and that's been done to mayors, it's been done to councillors in various municipalities across Ontario. I appreciate that anyone can call in that type of complaint at any time, but I'm just wondering if there is any advice that could be provided from the city to maybe try to deal with that type of situation.
Heidi or Tanya, can you take a stab at that?
So through you, Mr. Chair, or your worship, there is, as Councillor Weaver's referring to, there is an election blackout period that's actually set out in the Municipal Act. So we cannot do anything to lift that blackout period. It is reflected in our code of conduct at section 16.12.10. In terms of doing something about a person's ability to access the Occupational Health and Safety Act or make a complaint to the Ministry of Labor as a municipal government, I would have to think about that. My short answer would be probably not. But if the task force would like, can certainly undertake some research in the legal department as to what to do. I'm not sure through the chair to the councillor if you're speaking about complaints by employees or by members of the public under to the Ministry of Labor. I would think that the Ministry of Labor, and of course you may know that better, may restrict their investigations to matters pertaining to the workplace as defined. We've had some training before about the role of a member of council as not being an employee, or in some cases you do represent the employer. And so there's sort of a blurring of lines there. It may be interesting to look to the provincial government for some legislative reform when it comes to that particular act, and clarification as to how that act may apply to members who hold public office, because I think that's actually maybe the best avenue. So maybe if we take that offline and we can queue up a notice of motion, something that I think we have about 2 years lead time that we can bring to the provincial government and ask that they address that, because I would think that that's actually an abuse of that legislation. That's not the purpose of the legislation. It certainly shouldn't be used to undermine political careers or aspirations. And clearly that's why the Municipal Act has this blackout period, to not allow for abuse of these systems and these codes in those instances. And so that legislation should be drafted in a way that would also close the door to that type of abuse. And certainly we know our Ministry of Labor inspectors have other things to do when it comes to safety in the workplace.
Yes, so that's really what I'm trying to get at, is if the city can kind of run with that. And as much as I would love to bring something like that forward, I will obviously need someone else to do that for, on my behalf. And I won't probably be able to even vote on it or take part in that conversation. But I think that with the changes that came into effect in the last election, that what we've seen in the 2018 election in some municipalities is going to grow, and it's going to become more of a problem, a more wide-ranging problem. And I would be concerned for some of my colleagues that that's an ugly thing to have to go through. It's a very public process too, because Ministry of Labor, we're public. You can FOI our reports and whatnot, and really it can be used as a tool against somebody, and that's really what my concern is. So thank you for that, Heidi.
You're trying to make us feel despondent, Councillor Weaver? You're doing a good job of it. So anyone else wish to speak to this before we call the vote on the resolution as amended? Not seeing any hands raised. Chris, if you please call the vote on this, please.
All those in favor on the main motion as amended, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Motion carries as amended.
All right. Do we have any other business, Chris, on this?
We have the approval of the May 4th minutes.
Right. That would be item 5.1. Yes. So does anybody, can I have a mover then for approval of the minutes of our meeting of May 4th? I see Councillor Utley's moving it. Councillor Antosky is seconding it. Any discussion regarding the minutes themselves, the wording? Not seeing any. Chris, will you please call the vote on this?
All those in favor of the approval of the May 4th minutes, please raise your hand. Thank you. All those opposed? Motion carries.
And we have no resolutions, no notice of motion. And we're adjourning just in time for me to watch Global TV to see what they did.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, do we need to move a motion to disband the committee? Or is that automatic in the, I believe it's on the agenda?
Yeah, that was part of, I believe that was E, if I'm reading correctly. 4.1E.
Already? Just wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Yep, thank you very much. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I want to watch Global TV, see what they did to the interview with me today.
Well done, everyone.
Okay.
Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, have a good evening, have a good weekend, and we'll see you again. Don't forget, Tuesday night, there's a special council meeting. Do with Patty.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
Bye, everyone.